Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Michigan Senator Darrin Camilleri has a great American story. From an immigrant family who found work in Detroit's auto industry, he was the first in his family to go to college. He returned to his neighborhood to teach, then ran for office because he wanted more for his students. He flipped a seat in a district that voted for Donald Trump by 12 points. In office, he's made historic reforms and increased funding for schools, protected voting rights, and fought for working families. He has a demonstrated formula for success for Democrats in a swing state. It's worth listening to. Enjoy. Michigan Senator Darrin Camilleri, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I want to start, there's a lot of politics and policy we can get into, but you have a compelling life story, and you talk proudly about being the son of immigrants, and in a time where we're seeing immigrant communities vilified and attacked. Can you just tell us your story? Because it's a great American story.
Absolutely. So my father's an immigrant from Malta, which is a small little country in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. My mom's Mexican American. Our family's been here for quite some time, originally coming from Monterrey, Mexico to San Antonio, and then San Antonio to Detroit. And so my family's story began in Southwest Detroit, which is a historic neighborhood in the city of Detroit for immigrants and people who are finding their way to the middle class. And for people like me, I literally would not exist if it were not for the automobile industry attracting people to work in a place like Detroit, because Malta and Mexico do not meet anywhere else. And for my story to exist is one that I think is a really important story to tell about Michigan and how this country has prioritized people coming to find work, coming to build family, and coming to find new hope and new opportunity out of the American story. And that's literally how I live my life every day. I would not be in this place if it were not for the brave, courageous decision of my ancestors to make a journey to our beautiful home here in Michigan, here in this country, trying to just make their lives a little bit better. When I think about how I got to this place now as a state senator, it is really humbling to be able to uplift the stories of my family and other families like mine who are often not in the halls of power. We don't get to tell these immigrant stories as much as we should, where we need to advocate for various policies that include all of our voices. And now I'm in that position to be able to do that, which is really exciting.
Can you give some examples of how that background has influenced the way you think about policy?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I started my career as a teacher. I taught in that same neighborhood in Southwest Detroit, actually, that my family moved to originally. And that was a full circle moment for me. I am the first in my family to go to school and get a college degree. And for me, that experience was one that so many in my generation have tried to replicate, where we get a college degree, we go home or we go somewhere else and get a good job, and then do what we can to build a life for ourselves. I did that too. I became a teacher, but right in that moment when I became a teacher, I realized how quickly the systems that are around me are not built for success. And just decades, apart from when my dad and his family moved to Southwest Detroit, the school system was not the type of school system that we could be proud of, where I had to fundraise to get textbooks. I had to build a curriculum for my students. And I was struggling as a young teacher who then got appointed department chair on his first day of work. That system is not built for success. And so quickly I realized that I might need to do a little bit more. And so I ran for office to uplift stories like what I had just gone through for my students, but also to tell these stories about families like mine who are just trying their best to make it in Michigan and to make it in this country and to strive. Now that we're here 8 years later, I'm now serving in the state Senate. I've gone through many competitive elections and I'm chairing the school budget. And so it is a full circle moment where now I am in a position to fund our classrooms in a way that I hope no other teacher has to experience what I did as that first year teacher, struggling to have the materials that I needed for my students. And we've been able to do that. And we've been able to uplift not only the resources that we need, but investing in our communities that need it the most. We have more than doubled the funding for English language learners in the state of Michigan in the last year and a half. And that's because of my ability to be in the room to help advocate for that type of funding. We have created a brand new funding formula called the Opportunity Index, which spends specific resources on communities who need it the most, which are often communities of color and communities with concentrations of poverty, both rural and urban. That new funding formula is sending, for example, to the city of Detroit, another $25 million back to the school system, which they would not have gotten if this funding formula did not exist. And so we're creating an equitable system in a way that I know is making an impact, but I'm also confident that these types of systems change would not have happened if I was not in the role that I'm in.
Can we? I want to dive deep because this funding formula, your advocacy for teacher pay, for school libraries, transformational. But can we talk a little bit about how you make a jump from a new teacher to the state legislature? It strikes me that both jobs are not easy, and trying to do both are extremely difficult.
Being a teacher, I think, is still one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my entire life. You know, every day that I was in my classroom, you have the future of your students in the palm of your hand. And so that type of pressure and that type of environment that I was in, it was a very difficult job. But it also gave me this awesome responsibility to think about my place in the world and how I can use my experiences to do more, which is why back in 2016, I decided to run for state representative. I was a young teacher. There was an open state representative seat in my area that I lived and grew up in. And I knew that that was a potential battle for the control of the state house back in 2016. And so I threw my hat in the ring and I said, look, like my future aspirations, I never exactly dreamed of running for office, but I thought that if I were to win, obviously we can do all that we can to make important change. If I lost, okay, I'm still going to be a teacher and I'm going to do the thing that I had set out to do. And so for me, it was a win-win situation, even if I didn't know the outcome of the election. And so we not only ran in the most competitive Democratic primary that year in 2016, where I was running against 3 other candidates, all of whom I think had a lot more experience than I did in the political realm. We also had the most competitive general election. And so we won the primary by about 150 votes. It was a very close election in the primary. I don't necessarily think that I was the favored or chosen Democratic candidate in the primary, but we worked harder than anybody else. We knocked on doors. We raised money from everybody that I've ever met. We've done the things that everybody says you're supposed to do when it comes to a textbook campaign. So we win the primary, we go into the general election, and it was the most competitive general election of the 2016 cycle. You know, at the time, it was 8 years ago at this point. We all thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be the president, that it was going to be a cakewalk to winning that election, and that in Michigan, we thought we had a real shot at flipping the state house for the first time in a really long time. It's almost laughable to think about those types of predictions that we were making at that time, but we also knew that we had to invest in seats like mine. My predecessor was a Republican. It is a white working class, blue collar area that has a lot of auto workers and union members and has typically voted Democratic. My district voted for President Obama in 2008 and 2012, has voted for Democratic candidates for governor. But for some reason, we lost that seat in the 2010 election, and the Republican kept it until term limits kicked him out of office. So this was our chance to flip it. The House caucus spent a lot of money to support me. The House Republican campaign spent a lot of money against me. And we ended up winning on election night by 323 votes out of 47,000 that were cast. I was the only Democrat to flip a seat in 2016. And Donald Trump won my district that night by 12 points. So thousands of people voted for him and voted for me that very same night. And we could not be any further apart. The son of an immigrant, somebody who is a teacher, someone who advocates for the working class in a real way and actually delivers on those policies, somebody who cares about education and inclusivity and lifting up all voices. But voters, I think, saw in me the ability to advocate for our community in a way that nobody had ever been able to advocate for our community, because I knocked on 60,000 doors. Our campaign was massive. I personally knocked on 17,000 of those doors myself in 2016. And so I took the case door to door to talk about our environment, our jobs, our education system, and investing in ways to solve problems locally in my community. And it paid off. It was the hardest thing that I've ever done in terms of a campaign. But here we are 8 years later. We've now made it to the state Senate. We've had many competitive elections between that first election in 2016 and now. And I'm excited to continue to do the work.
Can you talk a little bit about what messages resonated in a district where voters are splitting their vote or engaging, like vote for Donald Trump by 12 points and elect you as well? And what the lessons the Democratic Party have learned and should continue to learn as we try to deliver Michigan for Vice President Harris.
I think that we've learned a lot since that election. I was that first person to flip a seat in a tough situation. Before it was cool in 2018, and we had lots of people who were flipping seats. And I think we all learned similar lessons where you have to meet voters where they are. You have to have conversations with them where they are, and you may not agree on every single policy, and that's okay. But if you can get to know the individual candidate as a person first, as someone who comes from the community and has a heart for others, someone who cares about solving problems, someone who's going to listen to you even if you disagree with them on their choice for president, that type of personal engagement is really what it requires for us to be effective representatives at the state legislative level as well as the congressional level. And you've seen that from a lot of our competitive members of Congress as well as our other competitive state legislatures who have been in the work in the community doing the work, hustling to get to know their neighbors. And that's something that I'm really proud that we've been able to do. And then secondarily, I would say, especially once we are in office, it's critical that you deliver on those promises. So when we say we're going to fix a local train crossing issue, for example, in my community, I have done everything in my power to secure funding, to help finish the permit process, and to help put us on track to building a bridge over this blocked train crossing that has been stopping people from getting to our local hospital, for example. So hyper local issues, following through on your promises, and then talking about issues that actually matter to the everyday lives of our residents: education, jobs, environment, healthcare. Those types of things will really make a difference.
We'll be back to our conversation in a minute, but first I want to tell you about a newsletter that I think you'd like. The New Deal, the same folks that produce this podcast, have a super informative weekly newsletter called the 2-Minute Download. In it, they cover the latest policy and governing news, from innovative ideas to increase the housing supply, to new ways that AI can be used to help government processes run more smoothly. Each week, they also highlight 3 ideas worth stealing. These policy solutions from state and local leaders are strategies for addressing climate change, creating good-paying jobs, and implementing holistic public safety programs. You can get the 2-Minute Download delivered to your inbox by signing up at newdealleaders.org/sign-up. That's newdealleaders.org/sign-up. Now, back to the show. And how do you feel like coming into 2024, those issues, jobs, healthcare, environment, are resonating with the voters in this election?
I think in this election, we're seeing, the cost of living become a number one priority for so many of our voters across the country. And whether it's lowering the cost of prescription drugs or taking on corporate price gouging, I do think that Vice President Harris has many plans that I think will address the needs of middle-class America. We've done some of this at the state level in Michigan, and we know that our residents are grateful for it, whether it's repealing the retirement tax in our state, which is something that I've been advocating for since that 2016 election. We followed through on our promise and did that last year, or creating the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, which is a piece of legislation that I've been championing in the state Senate, which would lower the cost of prescription drugs across the state. These types of policies are things that Vice President Harris is also advocating on, and I do think will make a difference when you look at the election results, because the alternative is Donald Trump, who only cares about the wealthy and the well-connected. Every single policy that he has introduced has only been about enriching the already rich. And I think that that is a critical distinction that's so important for us as we're taking on this November election.
And coming into November, you've been working on both on the ground campaigning, but more importantly, you've been working on voting rights. Can you talk about your efforts to ensure that the elections are free and accessible for Michiganders?
Yes, and I have great news. We just passed out the Michigan Voting Rights Act from the Senate this afternoon, and it's been a historic bill package where we are taking down those federal protections from the national level and enshrining them here in Michigan, so that every voter has a right to cast their ballot free from intimidation and free from fear. And it really goes back to that 2020 election where we saw so many efforts from the far right, folks like Rudy Giuliani and others, who attempted to undermine the results of the election here in Michigan and cast doubt on the results because of who was casting those ballots. We need to be very clear about that. They were attempting to throw out the votes of Detroiters, of Black Michiganders specifically. And I believe that they will attempt to do that again in 2024. And so it is so important that we pass the Voting Rights Act out of the Michigan House, get it to the governor's desk, and see more states who have the ability to do so to enshrine voting rights at the state level. As we saw with Roe versus Wade, precedent at the federal Supreme Court is not something that will always remain. And so as we've seen with the Shelby v. Holder case in 2013, there was an Arizona voting rights case in 2021. The Supreme Court has taken away step by step some of those protections from the Federal Voting Rights Act. It's now critical that we enshrine those protections at the state level. And that's exactly what we did out of the state Senate here today, which I'm very, very proud of.
And now that you've protected the right to vote and we're mobilizing and educating and turning out voters for November, obviously Michigan is a huge battleground state. Do you have a sense as to how things are playing out on the ground there, and what those of us in less contested states can do to help?
If you have an ability to drive to Michigan and knock on some doors this November, please do, because obviously it's important that we elect Vice President Harris, but it's also important that we keep the Democratic House in Michigan. We have a 1-seat majority in the Democratic House. We have a 1-seat majority in the Democratic Senate as well, but we're not on the ballot this year. Just the House is. And in order to protect all of these advancements that we've made in the last year and a half at the state level, we need to ensure that every single voter heads to the polls and casts their ballot for people who actually want to solve problems for them and in their communities. And so if you can make some phone calls, if you can send some money to the Michigan House Democratic Caucus, if you can come and knock on some doors in Michigan this fall, we are a great place to be in the fall. It's beautiful weather. You can go to some apple orchards and pick some apples and get some apple cider as well. I highly encourage you to make a trip out here, because all eyes will be on Michigan for Vice President Harris, but also for our state legislature.
You've recently moved from, as you mentioned, from the House to the Senate. Can you talk about the differences in that experience and in your role in policymaking?
So being a state senator is only different in that we serve more constituents and have a little bit more experience under our belts, for many of us, at least, in the Michigan Senate. Most of us have been legislators in the past, and so we've had years of experience, negotiating or advocating or working with people on the other side of the aisle to get some things done. That for me has been a worthwhile experience where I feel like I was fully prepared for the moment that we took office as a Democratic majority in the state Senate. This is the first Democratic majority in the state Senate in 40 years, more than my lifetime. And we've been able to use the gavel in a way that I think has proven, hopefully, that we'll be in a good position to win re-election as the majority caucus in 2026. But the real difference really is just the size of the communities that we serve. In the state house, it's about 90,000 people. In the state Senate, it's about 270,000 people. So it's about 3 times as many. And dealing with, in my instance, 17 different communities with 17 different mayors, 17 different city councils. I think I have 12 different school districts, 12 different school boards. It's a lot of community leaders that we need to interact with on a daily basis in order to ensure that we are effectively representing them. Thankfully, we have a good team on our side, and I'm grateful for my staff to be able to help us, communicate the message, solve problems, and listen to the broader district that we now serve.
I want to go back and talk about that school funding effort that you led. School funding politics is among the most difficult politics. And as you said, you represent a dozen school boards. So tell us a little bit about how you moved that funding formula through and the politics around it, how you built consensus with a 1-vote majority in the Senate.
So we had historic revenue that we were able to utilize in last year's fiscal 23 and 24 budget, as well as this year's 25-26 budget. We were in a position because of some of the federal resources, but also significant surpluses from state tax dollars to really have a robust discussion around school finance here in Michigan. And with that, we were able to send back the most amount of money in Michigan history back to our classrooms, where not only do we see historic per pupil revenue, we were able to create and fully fund the Opportunity Index, which is a funding formula for at-risk and disadvantaged school districts who need a little bit of support on their journey towards equity. We invested over $200 million more into that pot. It's typically called at-risk money, but we've now reorganized it as the Opportunity Index. And then this year, we put an additional amount of money that put it at over $1 billion of Opportunity Index funding, which is now serving so many students who need it the most. We invested in the free breakfast and lunch program last year and continue it again this year. We expanded preschool opportunities for all Michiganders and expanded that out even further this year. We fully funded special education. We invested in the teacher pipeline. We created a student teacher loan forgiveness program, which was an idea of mine that I've been working on for many years. I was so grateful we were able to get that done. We're paying student teachers in Michigan for the first time. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And that's actually one of the most beautiful things about the situation that we were in, is that we were the right leaders at the right time with the right amount of resources. And we prioritized education in a way that no other legislature has. And so alongside the leadership of Governor Whitmer, of ourselves in the Senate and our Democratic colleagues in the House, we were all unified in this mission to spend as much money as we could, helping to support our students.
And tell me about your other policy initiatives and goals for both this session and then in future sessions.
So we've been working on a lot of different things. I mean, in the last year, we have expanded and put forth a brand new energy policy in the state where we're going to be combating climate change in Michigan in a way that puts us at the forefront of the nation, carbon free by 2040, which is a huge deal, especially being the automobile state and now being one of the cleanest energy states, or at least on the pathway toward that. We have protected labor rights in Michigan and really expanded out our ability to allow unions to collectively bargain for our construction workers to receive better pay. And something that we're working on right now is revolves around, again, protecting some of our vulnerable communities. The federal government recently codified OMB language to enact several different standards for racial classification, one of which is codifying the Middle Eastern North African category on the census. And so one of the things that we're looking to do this fall is to expand out those classifications for our communities to protect MENA, as it's called, the Middle Eastern North African category, at the state level, so that no matter what happens at the federal level, we will have this designation at the state level. And Michigan has, the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the country. And that's a huge deal when we're talking about these equity issues for schools, as well as so many other items that take place. It's important that we have the full picture of the data of all residents who live in our state. So we're working on some legislation there. And then most recently, we're working on legislation around hazardous waste in our state. We've had some high-profile instances of radioactive waste coming into Michigan, and it's actually coming to my district. And so we're working on some legislation to protect our environment, to potentially stop radioactive waste from being dumped in our state, and looking at some additional regulations there as well.
That's a full calendar of
a little busy.
Very busy. It strikes me that, as you mentioned, Michigan has long held the brand as the automotive state. Obviously, great universities, beautiful environment. But it feels like there's a real transformation going on in terms of the priorities and what it looks like. What do you see as the future for Michigan in this ever-changing world of changing climates, changing technologies, changing economies? How does Michigan feel its way to the future?
So I am the son and grandson and great-grandson of auto workers. That's sort of the name of the game for many families in the state. And that is something that is always going to be an important part of our economy. Autos will always drive Michigan's economy, but it cannot be the only thing that drives our economy. And so we've looked at historic economic incentive deals to bring battery manufacturing as well as electrical vehicles here to Michigan, as well as all of the other components that go along with electrification of the vehicle fleet. We're looking at today, there's some stories about the CHIPS Act potentially being used for a chips manufacturer in Michigan so that we have some high-tech manufacturing. We need to be a both and state where we are investing in the core economic realities of Michigan, the auto industry, and we look at expanding out as technologies change, because we are always going to be a state that makes things, but we need to be an economy that is resilient, that no matter what we're making, we'll still be able to produce the types of jobs that give people living wages and that give people those opportunities at the American dream, just like how my family got their American dream started here in Michigan.
I love that. I want to thank you for joining us today, and also thank you for being part of New Deal. I think the work you're doing around education, voting rights, and so many other things are a model for other states. And we can win at the federal level, but it's also important we win at the state level and establish these protections going forward. And I think you're setting up a good example for the rest of us. And so thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and follow us along in Michigan. I'm telling you that we are doing some amazing work at the state legislature level, and we are only getting started. We got a couple more years of this term left to go, and my hope is that we'll have many more to come as we're trying our best to be a state where not only can we grow our population and grow our economy, but we can set the standard for the rest of the country.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.